Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of the TROPT Webcast. This month, we're talking about data subject rights. That's one of the themes that we're exploring here at TROPT. And I couldn't be more excited to talk with Ketch's CTO, Vivek Vaidya, who is joining us today. Vivek, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us. I know you guys have a lot of things cooked up at Ketch, and I'd love to get into that. If there's anything that you want to share with the audience, I usually ask about how you got ended up in privacy tech, what your origin story is leading up to privacy tech, and why privacy tech. You could have built in any other industry. So with that in mind, Vivek, please share a little bit more about you and your origin story in this emerging privacy tech space.
Absolutely. Well, first, Lourdes, thank you for having me on the show. It's great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. The backstory of how I got into privacy tech or how Ketch was launched is that I'm a serial entrepreneur. Ketch is my third uh, third project together with my long-term co-founder and business partner Tom Chavez. And before Ketch, actually, we had started a company called Crux, which was a data management platform for ad tech and martech. And we started the company in late 2009, early 2010. And as you might imagine, at that time, all of the regulation from various jurisdictions, GDPR, CCPA, CPR, none of these things existed. Uh, so the we so our platform was used by leading media companies of the world and leading marketers of the world. So when GDPR hit in when May 25th, 26th, 2018, a year or so before that, we had to go through this process of GDPR compliance. And by that time, actually, Crux had gotten acquired by Salesforce in November 2016, and I was then after a few months, I basically became the CTO of the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So GDPR compliance for Salesforce Marketing Cloud was fortunately or unfortunately my responsibility, and so that's where I got my first exposure to this problem. And as you might imagine, it was hard because none of these systems that were designed before 2015, 2016, or even 2018 actually were designed with that uh, privacy being an anchor tenant. Right? People would collect data, but there was no requirement for here's why I am collecting data, right? And the ability to comply with regulations to honor data subject rights requests was new for everyone. And so we went through the process, and I think we did a pretty good job of building whatever we built at Crux and Salesforce to comply with GDPR. But it made me realize that businesses must be struggling with this. If a tech forward company like Salesforce does not have it easy, then the rest of the world surely is going to struggle with this as well. So that's where the germ of this idea for building a platform for automating privacy came into being. And so that's the backstory really for Ketch, Lourdes.
Oh, that resonates very well, and I'm sure it does with many of our audience members. I remember those days leading up to GDPR, and Salesforce certainly was one of the clients, the vendors that many of my clients had in the past. And
Mhm.
exactly what you were saying, right? Like when a company like Salesforce in the early days was still struggling, and not just Salesforce, every big tech company
Yeah.
was struggling to answer their customers' questions about how they're handling different compliance problems, including DSRs, and what else. The rest of the world and most companies out there don't have the technological resources that big companies like Salesforce does. I do want to dig deeper into that because you bring up a great point about you know all these other companies probably have similar problems or are having a harder time, similar pain points when it comes to complying with GDPR, but particularly when it comes to DSRs. But so let's unpack that a little bit. What were some of the use cases that you were seeing, not just at Salesforce, but even as you launched Ketch and started talking, doing your market research and started talking to customers and prospects? What were some of the privacy and, let's say, data ownership is very much entangled when it comes to DSRs, which is a little bit controversial? What were some of those use cases that they were trying to solve for that led you to building Ketch's DSR product?
Yeah. So the first use case, really, right? If you think about a DSR, which is data subject rights, a request that one of your customers gives to you. So if I am a customer of Nike,
I guess let's take a step back. What are DSRs, Vivek?
yeah, good.
Let's go there.
Yeah. So DSR stands for data subject rights, and the a data subject really is the term. All this terminology, by the way, it comes from GDPR. That was the first regulation that came out in Europe that kind of defined these terms. So a data subject is a consumer or a customer. So I buy shoes from Nike. I go to Nike.com and I buy a pair of shoes. I become Nike's customer. From GDPR's perspective now, so as in the process of buying these shoes from Nike, Nike now has some data about me. They have my name, they have my email address, they have my billing address, shipping address, they have my credit card information even, which they may store or they may rely on a third party to store that information. Nike also perhaps has information about what products I've browsed on the Nike website, right? So they have all of this data about me. So now what GDPR did, it said that data subjects or consumers, customers have some rights. They can go to a business like Nike, and by the way, they call these businesses controllers. They were data controllers. I could go to a business like Nike and say, hey, Nike, give me all of the data you have about me. That was an access request, a data subject access request, or DSAR, right? That was one of the rights. Right to access was one of the rights I could exercise as a data subject or a consumer / customer of Nike, and I could submit an access request, and Nike was obliged to share with me all of the data that they had about me within a certain period of time. Like they had, I think the regulation says 45 days or something, 30 or 45 days. But within 30 to 45 days, Nike was obligated to actually come back to me with, here's all of the data I have about you. Now, and that's where one of the use cases came from, Lourdes, which is how do you define from Nike's perspective what data Nike has about me, right? So I gave you some examples. When I went to store.nike.com, I gave them my name, email address, phone number, billing address, shipping address, etc. That's clearly data they have about me. Now, they may be storing it in their databases, or they may be using some other third-party service to manage their e-commerce storefront. So that data goes into that system now. So that's where one of the use cases came from, which is how do you define what data is going to be returned by Nike and where does that data live? So data discovery was the first use case. Before I can share all of the data that I as Nike have about Vivek, I need to know where it is. So data discovery became the first use case that we had to solve for. And the systems that we had.
Before we
Yeah.
No, I want to unpack that a little bit before we jump into, and I love that you started with the access right, because there are erasure, portability, the right to stop processing, and all of these other types of DSR rights that the data subjects, Europeans and Californians and other states have. I would like to start there because you can't respond to any of these things without, like you said, discovering where the data is. And when it comes to defining it, the regulation has this legal definition high level, which is great, but at the technical level, you kind of have to bring that down a little bit from the broad definition that you have under the law into ones and zeros, and figuring out how do you apply that definition of personal data, which is very all encompassing, really, right? If you look at the GDPR's definition of personal data, it 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 covers a lot. And how do you discover all those things that aren't the average person would think as regular personal data? So there are quite a bit of challenges that I've seen in my own practice before I started Trope, that I've seen when it comes to discovering data. It's easy to discover names and other
Mhm.
directly identifiable personal data. But you guys saw all of these. What was that like to build a solution, even before the DSR solution? But like the discoverability of that is one of the functionalities that you guys need to have in place first.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The discovering what data is applicable for access is a big challenge, because it comes back to uh, software, data management software that's been built in the last however many years, right, wasn't designed to take into account the eventuality that we're living with right now, where I might have to respond to data subject access requests, right? So the first order of business ends up being, hey, I need to build a data catalog that tells me I have data
Hmm.
sitting in 15 different databases. What's actually exacerbated this problem is the the prevalence of the cloud, right? Where
Hmm.
your data is no longer in just one system. It's no longer in one Oracle database. It could be in an Oracle database. It could be in a data warehouse. It could be in blob storage because you're sharing it with somebody else. It could be in third-party systems. So the universe of systems that contain this personal data has just expanded rapidly in the last 5 to 10 years, right? So putting a tent over that circus and really understanding, hey, I have personal data in these 15 databases across these 5 data systems becomes the first challenge you need to solve for. And then related to that is the challenge that you brought up, which is, how do I define personal data? Yes, first name, last name. Yes, it's kind of sort of obvious that that's personal data. But the fact that I've put you in a frequent shoe buyer segment, if I'm Nike, is also personal data because it's tied to my identity, right?
Exactly.
And so recognizing that and figuring out which systems could contain this data becomes an
Hmm.
important challenge for you to solve. So Ketch
And
does that, and we had to we so our whole, and actually this is not just Ketch, but if you're thinking through these things, right? The and if you want to do it programmatically, uh, then you have to have a data catalog that gives you complete information about your entire dataverse.
that's accurate and up to date as well, because in the olden times what we used to do was, believe it or not, use Excel spreadsheets. And
Yeah.
so one of the great things about products like DSRs that are coming out of the privacy tech space is that there is this capability to update it in real time.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, so there's the comprehensiveness problem that you touched upon. The cloud being one of the problems, right? Or one of the challenges that raises this problem is obviously the cloud and cloud applications. But what about shadow IT and all the different places that you could just store on your network, um, in different applications, all of those things in transit, and all of that. So I'm curious, how are you guys ensuring that the product that you're building accounts for comprehensiveness when it comes to your customer, allowing your customers to respond in a comprehensive? It's never going to be perfect, but we do need to strive to as complete as possible when it comes to that, given the regulators requirements to be as as responsive when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think, and this is one of the things that a lot of people struggle with. And some questions have good answers and complete answers. Some questions don't. Like, for example, if I if I if you send me an email, you're working in the HR department, I'm an analyst, and you ask me to pull a report of some sort which says, okay, give me a report of all the employees and some information about them, right? uh, I'll go run a query in our data warehouse. I'll pull that information out into an Excel spreadsheet and email it to you. Now, that Excel spreadsheet now has personal data, right?
Exactly.
And it's an email. Now, you might download it onto your computer, and now it's sitting on your computer, right? So part of the solution over here is obviously has to involve some best practices and tooling and all of that. But the systems that can be inspected, meaning databases, network file systems, cloud storage systems, message buses, etc. All of these systems that can be inspected programmatically. What we tell our customers to do is we are going to go and discover all of that, right? So it doesn't matter how insignificant you think a data system is, point us to that system, and we will tell you whether that system has personal data or not. And then you can decide whether that personal data is useful and should be considered as part of processing DSRs or not. We've had customers, Lourdes, who in the process of going through this inventory with us have realized that, oh, these three databases that contain personal data, why are we using them again? We don't have any need, nobody touches them. So they actually ended up sunsetting those data platforms, and it ended up saving them some money just because they went through this process of data cataloging and data discovery with us.
And so I love this use case, this example, because not only does it um, address data minimization, which is an important GDPR requirement, but it also, like you said, has value. It saved them money. And so, it's one of those use cases that you could use that has the carrot and the stick, right? Like you
Right,
get to
exactly.
comply, you don't get to, you don't get fined for doing the right thing here and sunsetting them, but you also you also get to save the business money. I'd
Yeah.
love to talk about, because there are multiple use cases when it comes to DSRs. I'd love to talk more about the deletion requests
Yeah.
and portability. And you said something that was pretty important, right? Like we need to be able to discover as much as we can. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to then do, if they turn and come back and say, I also want to delete my data in addition to getting access to it, you're not going to be able to do that appropriately in all the different instances and storage and servers if you don't have a good catalog of where your
Catalog.
data.
Yeah.
Right. And so
So I think let's take those up. Let's take those up separately, like delete and then portability.
sure.
Delete is very interesting. Delete is very interesting because on the surface, say if I get a request to delete, if I'm Nike and I get a request to delete your data, you might think, oh yeah, just you know which databases have personal data. Just go and do delete from table where email equal lourdes@gmail.com, right? Well, unfortunately, it's not that straightforward
No.
because first, well, there are two or three types of issues that you have to confront with. First is the performance issue, right? Just issuing a blanket delete from large data sets from your transactional data systems could create performance issues, right? So that's thing number one. The more important thing is that the semantics of delete need to be defined. For example, let's say
What do you
that you
mean
have
by
a
what do you mean by
semantics.
that? The
Yes.
semantics of deletion.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Can you explain that
Yep.
further?
Yep. I'm getting to that. So oftentimes it's not, you actually don't want to outright delete the data. And by semantics of delete, I mean you depending on the data that is contained in whatever tables, the definition of what you mean by delete could actually mean anonymization. Delete could actually mean masking. Delete could actually mean obfuscation, hashing, etc. Because let's say you have a table that stores it's a transactions table, right? That you use to compute how much revenue you are generating every month. If I suddenly go in and delete records from that table, right, you've lost orders, and your revenue number now is not what it should be if you're reporting it up to your auditors, your finance organization, etc. So the right thing to do over there is actually interpret the right from GDPR as a right to be forgotten, right? Which means that you go in and say, look, I have data for Lourdes. I will make sure that there is no way that someone can come in and identify that data as belonging to Lourdes, which means that I might do some hashing of the email, right? And I could use custom salts to make sure that it's not a standard hash. So if somebody cannot mount dictionary attacks on my database. But more importantly, I can also use things like masking, obfuscation, hashing, etc., to give our developers and the people implementing these delete requests the ability to comply with the regulation and meet the business requirement at the same time. And the business requirement in this example being the revenue reporting needs to be accurate and not change as we are processing these DSRs requests.
This gets us into another tangential important distinction under GDPR between anonymization and pseudonymization, right? Because like you said, anonymization renders personal data not personal data. So once it's
Correct.
anonymized, it's no longer personal data. Whereas when it's pseudonymized, there's still the possibility for re-identification. So
Correct.
at Ketch, so you're applying these legal standards at a technical level. At Ketch, how do you make the determination that a technique like hashing versus masking versus salted hash or any other type of technique rises to the standard of anonymization versus just pseudonymization? Pseudonymous data is still personal data.
Correct.
So that you don't get, your customers don't get fined under GDPR. I
Yep.
guess the question behind that is, does Ketch's DSR product also include the capability for deletion
Yes.
capabilities? Okay.
Yes. And we've actually taken it one step further, where we have recommendations based. So one of the things that I glossed over as I was describing the data discovery bit is that along with the data discovery bit is the very important step of identifying which systems have personal data and what type of personal data. So we have machine learning algorithms that will go and classify columns. So you have a database table that contains 15 columns. We will tell you column 1 is actually a social security number. Column 2 is an email address, even though the column names might not be social security number and email underscore address respectively. They could be named whatever. But we will tell you based on the data contained in those columns that this is a social security number and this is an email address. Now, once we have these, and we have like, I don't know, hundreds of labels that we classify for. Once we have these labels associated with columns of data, right? Then we make recommendations based on the regulations and the sensitivity of the information, right? So and exactly to your point, that anonymization versus pseudonymization are two different things. Pseudonymization does allow for re-identification depending on the label that we've identified. When a delete request comes in, right? For example, if we've classified a thing as an email address, we might recommend, we will recommend that you anonymize and not pseudonymize, because you want to retain the data, right? That, this email address, vivek@gmail.com, bought a product that generated in $10 of revenue. You want that fact that there was an order for $10, right? But you don't want it associated with Vivek anymore. So you will just X out the email address and anonymize it. so that when you're doing a query for total revenue last quarter, it will still be consistent and include that number, right? So we make these recommendations based on the labels that we identify or that we classify those columns as. Now, our models get trained based on corpuses of data that we procure from open source mechanisms and paid mechanisms and whatnot. But we also allow our customers to tell us, hey, you're doing the right thing. This is a good label. This is not the right label. So they can go in and specify these labels themselves. And then based on their classification, the recommendations for what action we want to take, and this comes back to the semantics of the delete, right, then get implemented in an automated manner. Does that answer your question?
That answers your question. I do want to take it a step further. Once you provide the recommendations, the options that they have in terms of different anonymization and pseudonymization techniques, is that something that the user or the customer then does in the back end and delete themselves, or is that part of the product where one of the features of the product is to also include different anonymization and pseudonymization features?
So we execute the full flow end to end.
Okay.
So you have
That's good.
Our customers have access to a low code / no code platform, which is driven by policies that they use to define the actions they want to take. And then what we do is we take those actions that they've defined, hey, mask this, anonymize that, hash this, delete that, whatever specification they have in these policies, and then we generate the code that needs to be executed in the respective data systems. Because the code that needs to be executed in a system like MongoDB to implement a delete with masking is different from the code that needs to be used for a system like Snowflake. MongoDB is a document database. Snowflake is a NewSQL data warehousing, data analytics platform, right? So we generate that code and we execute it on behalf of the customer as well. We show them, here are the various operations that we're going to run. In fact, we actually go down to the level of showing them the actual SQL query that we're going to run, and they have full visibility into that. And they can choose to customize it if they want to, but in the normal programming implementation of the Ketch platform, we generate the DML or all of the statements ourselves, and we connect to the databases and execute all of this ourselves without the customer having to write any code. That is what we mean, Lourdes, by programmatic privacy.
I'm loving this discussion, and so our audience members, we have several comments, and I do want to take up one question before we jump to portability. So just resonating with you about how difficult it's been to find data, and I think the other challenge that we didn't get into is then flowing this down to all the vendors, right? The processors and sub-processors. So if there's anything there that you guys are doing in terms of feature, please feel free to chime into that. When it comes to that, does the Ketch DSR product have capability for their customers to flow down DSR requests to their sub-processors? If not, no worries. And then I'll give you a question or I'll relay a question from one of our audience members.
Yes. So the short answer to that question, does Ketch propagate those DSR requests to processors on behalf of controllers? Absolutely. And the way we do that is through APIs. So we don't. So the state of the art in the industry right now, and what people mean by workflow and automation is, I have a workflow where I'll send an email to privacy. So if I'm Nike, I'll send an email to privacy@hubspot.com, and please execute the DSR request. What we do is we actually connect to these systems using APIs that they provide. And sometimes not all of them provide privacy APIs. So we have to reverse engineer, we have to materialize a privacy API layer for these vendors. And we send an API request to these vendors to implement and execute the corresponding system. So either it's a, hey, delete this data, and then the processor does whatever they do with the delete, or I want access to, I want I want to execute an access request for this data subject with this identity, and then the data comes back. So yes, we propagate the requests to the processors and do it in a fully automated manner.
I love the distinction that you were giving about workflow versus workflow automation, which, sending an email to a vendor, that was just the old school way of doing that. So one question that we need to clarify, and the background on this is that DSRs is like one category of privacy tech that is not only huge in the B2B space, but also has its counterpart in the B2C space. And one of the questions that we have is, so does Ketch communicate with data subjects? Is there a B2C version of it in addition to the B2B category, where you guys also handle the front, not just the intake for your enterprise customers or B2B customers, but also like the consumer facing? Is there a consumer facing aspect of
Yes.
Ketch's DSR product?
So the consumer facing aspect applies to both B2C and B2B, right? So if you are a controller and you're a customer of Ketch, you and regardless of whether you are, you're a company like Nike, which could be considered B2C, and Nike is a controller, or you are a B2B company that is a processor really, that needs to honor these DSR requests. Regardless, you have to present that preferences form, or DSR acceptance intake form, as they call it, to the data subjects, right? So that's one way in which Ketch communicates, or interacts, I should say communicate, but interacts with uh, uh, consumers or data subjects. For B2C companies, we also have a consent management platform that accompanies the DSR, the data subject rights automation platform that we have. So in that, we are responsible for showing the consent form to the user, depending on which jurisdiction they come from and whatnot, and storing all that consent information and propagating that consent back to processors and third parties as well, right? So that's one way in which we interact with consumers and data subjects. Another way in which we interact with consumers and data subjects is for identity verification. So when I get a data subject, so I can go to any website right now and fill in a request form for Lourdes, right? I can give you, hey, please give me all the data for lourdes@gmail.com, right? Now, so there needs to be a verification step in the middle. So Ketch takes responsibility for doing that verification, either ourselves through email and whatnot, or we partner with companies like TransUnion, Experian, etc., to do the identity verification for our customers. That's the second way in which we interact with data subjects or consumers. The third way in which we interact with consumers and data subjects is through a portal. So let's say that you are Nike is a customer of Ketch. They're not, but let's assume they were, right? And if they were, and you submitted an access request to Nike, well, you need to have a way to get that data. So Ketch would execute all of the workflows to pull the data from internal, external, third-party systems, etc., and then collect all of that information into a file or a set of files that then will be made available to you, the consumer. So the consumer interacts with this portal, this data access portal that Ketch has, and then to access the data for the subject request, DSR that they submitted for Nike or whatever customer they submitted it for. So there are three ways in which we interact with consumers or data subjects.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put a pin on the access portability point, because I do want to spend a few minutes on that, but we have plenty of questions. It seems like people are really loving this conversation. So what the other one that we have is whether Ketch's product has the ability to unify multiple requests from the same individual. And I've seen this in my old practice as well. I had customers, I had clients before who had multiple companies, right? Like 200, 300 subsidiaries. And one of the things that they would get is a DSR for this brand and another one there. Or sometimes people just submit multiple DSRs even for a single entity. And so I'm curious, does Ketch have the ability to unify that? Because in the backend, even though there are multiple brands, it's still one company, one IT, one privacy group. And so it would be, I guess I'm speaking on behalf of this customer, user buyer. Is there a capability to unify multiple requests from the same individual under the current product or in the roadmap?
Yeah, so I think it's a two. I'll answer the question using in two parts. One,
Sure.
one from the perspective of a holding company that has multiple brands,
Mm-hmm.
and as a consumer, you might submit requests to those multiple brands, right?
Yep.
If you do that, and if the holding company is a customer of Ketch, right? In that case, all of the data that we collect as part of serving access requests to various brands, it is unified and presented to the consumer as one package,
Great. Thank you for
right?
that clarification.
Right. So that's thing number one. The second scenario is now across companies. So as a consumer, you may submit data subject your access requests to company A, company B, company C, right? And if all three companies are Ketch customers, right, then as a consumer, you're like, oh well, Ketch manages all of these things. Why don't I have my own uh, uh, personal data vault managed and maintained by Ketch, where I can access all of my access requests? So that is not something we do right now, Lourdes. It is something that is on our roadmap, and we've thought about it for quite some time. Uh, but that's
What are some of
but
the
that
challenges there? What are some of the
so
challenges there?
so the first challenge really is will the companies be okay with that, right?
Mm.
And all of that data being combined across companies and presented to the consumer like that. That may or may not be a challenge, but we think it is, and we don't want to do this in a way that we just rush into it. We want to make sure we do it taking all these things into consideration.
And that
The,
you
the
listen
sec-
to the customers.
Correct. We listen to our customers, and we want to balance, like listening to our customers as well as uh, with our consumers, because we do believe that privacy is a fundamental human right, right? And so, from the consumer's perspective, having access to all this information in one portal is the right thing to do, but we want to do it taking all these considerations into account. The second challenge, is will our consumers really trust us? Will the end consumer actually will they trust a company like Ketch with all of this data and whatnot? And I think they will, but again, we just want to do it in a step-by-step manner and not rush into this. So it is something on our roadmap, and it is something that and eventually get to doing in the next how many months or years. But we don't support it right now, Lourdes. The
Okay.
second
Thank you.
modality we don't support right now.
Thank you for clarifying that. So the other question that we have is, what are some of the when it comes to deletion, what are some of the acknowledgements that Catch receives? Um, is there confirmation of actual deletion? I think you kind of answered this earlier, but to just be very explicit about it, you guys have the feature to actually go and take your customers' um, uh, preferences, right? The hashing versus masking, and actually do the deletion or the right to be forgotten from a technical perspective. Is that correct? Correct me if
Yes,
I
that's
if I
right.
misheard you. Okay.
No, that's right. That's right. And the confirmation of reception or confirmation of actual deletion is also done programmatically, because we're using APIs to connect to these systems. If I submit a request for access, right? Then depending on how the API works, whether it is synchronous or asynchronous, meaning I submit the request now, and then the API says, come back, check back in 7 days, and you'll have this data, right? We implement that confirmation of receipt or actual access or deletion programmatically uh, through these APIs that we've integrated with.
How would you, depending, I mean, I think what's the state of the art right now? Some of the APIs have the capability of like actual deletion. Is it 50-50? What are the numbers? Before it was just confirmation. But what are the numbers like right now? Are
That
these companies
that
building the actual deletion feature more and more?
that's an
I'm guessing that's what's happening, but please correct me.
that's an excellent question. I I don't know enough to say 50-50, 60-40, 70-30 because I don't know the denominator, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I do know is that we've been uh, we've been fairly successful in in using the APIs provided by these companies to implement this programmatic interaction. And we actually have a taxonomy for these companies. So in our parlance, companies fall into three categories.
Okay.
One, those that have explicit APIs for privacy management. HubSpot is a good example of that. Category number two is companies that have APIs but don't have privacy specific APIs. And so
Okay.
for category two, what we do is we use their core APIs and materialize a privacy API layer that we then use to talk to their core APIs. And
Hmm.
so LinkedIn is a good example of that. We're the only company that has this kind of programmatic connection to LinkedIn for LinkedIn marketing for handling DSRs and consent propagation into the LinkedIn systems, right? And then the third category are companies that don't have an API, right? So for the third category, unfortunately, we have to resort to the old school email-based way
Of
of,
course.
okay, I send you an email saying, please delete the data for this data subject on behalf of so and so, and then the regular like, did you do the thing, the workflow thing kind of takes over at that point.
Wow. For some reason, I just assumed that it's been what, 5 years? It's been quite a few years since GDPR and CCPA that you would have think that many of these companies would have at least built APIs to handle these types of requests. Not even the privacy specific APIs, but at least APIs for so that we don't have to do things
You would
manually.
be actually you'd be I'm as amazed as you are. In fact, like for Facebook or Meta now, the, you cannot submit an access request on behalf of a business programmatically. You can send a
Hmm.
delete, but to get access to the data, you cannot submit an API request. So, you know, now the reason why companies don't have APIs, right, are one reason could be because of technical reasons, like they just don't have an API. But I also think that there are companies that choose not to have APIs because of very, I won't speculate on the reasons, but I'm pretty sure they choose not to have APIs because I agree with you. In today's day and age, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, or you should be leading with APIs
Right.
when possible.
Well, regardless of the intent behind that, there are companies that do that, and this gets to that comment. Actually, there are some
Yeah.
companies that are not willing to expose their data systems outside. But the question they have for you there is whether your product is cloud-based or licensed. Like, what type of instances can be
Yep.
on-prem, or what are the options that customers have, especially the ones who are asking in the audience right now?
Yeah. Great question. Great question. So Ketch is software as a service platform,
Hmm. So
and
cloud-based, absolutely.
we recognize that customers have this challenge. They do not want their data exfiltrated. So we have a hybrid deployment where we give our customers a piece of software that they deploy in their own infrastructures, on-prem, in the cloud, etc., that
Mm.
interacts with their data systems in their environment. We don't see any credentials, we don't see any data. All of that is managed in the customer's infrastructure, but our piece of software that runs in the customer's environment communicates with our SaaS platform so that customers can access reports, define policies, define actions, etc., in the SaaS platform that are then executed and enforced in the customer's data system using this piece of software that runs in their environment.
So for the cloud, for the SaaS version of it, where is Ketch localized? I'm guessing a DPO is asking this question.
So because we run in the cloud, right? We have presence in, of course, in the US, right? We have presence in Europe, in the various. So our primary cloud that we use is AWS. So anywhere AWS has a presence, we can run in it. We can run in those jurisdiction and those localities.
And as of today, I mean, you don't have to have it today, but this is one of, again, my former clients, especially in the cybersecurity space. As of today, there's something that they had to put in place because of GDPR. Is there a configuration that Ketch customers can turn on to choose which instance they would want?
Yeah, so we would work with our customers to figure out, okay, where do you want your primary instance to be, right? And if they say, okay, it's Europe, then we will configure the customer's account to be served always out of the European infrastructure that we have in AWS.
Okay, perfect. Obviously, this is, I mean, most companies still have international data flows, especially when it comes to, I mean, if you have European customers, obviously, but also support. Your support teams are probably all over the world, and some of them could have access to personal data, correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we could keep talking about this, but I do want to maybe just spend a couple of minutes on portability and what you guys have built in that space. One of the challenges that we had leading up to GDPR and even today was having standards in place when it comes to portability, so that whatever data that your customers may want to provide to their customers, you're providing it in a way that the consumers and people can then take in a usable way. It's not just a PDF that they're unable to use and take elsewhere. So what are some of the things that you guys are doing in this space? I feel like this is an unfair question because we do need standards from an industry perspective. So maybe, answer it two ways. What are some of the things that you guys are doing internally at Ketch when it comes to portability, but also if you're working with industry when it comes to, I think there was a data portability initiative. I actually don't know what happened out of that, so I'll have to look that up after this. And so any industry groups that you guys are working with when it comes to standardizing data portability.
Yeah. So again, I'll answer the question in 2 or 3 parts. The first is, you said, I want to focus on the word portability, right? The reason why that right was put into GDPR was that if I'm using a service like Pandora, and I want to take all of my music preferences, the playlists I might have created, etc. I want to port it to Spotify. I want to say, Pandora, I no longer want to be a customer. I want to shift my allegiance to Spotify. I need to be able to port that into Spotify. That's where the idea of portability came from, right? And so the underlying technical implication is that the way the data is provided by Pandora has to be machine readable, right? So the first, and this is where your point about standards comes in, Lourdes. It's an absolutely valid point that there must be standards. So what we've done, we've done 2 things. One, the format in which we expose this data is machine readable. It's either JSON or CSV, anything, and together with the schema definitions for the data that we have exported. And we can do this because we have the data catalog, right? So we, in addition to providing the data, we provide details about the schema that the data corresponds to as well, so that it can be readable by machines down the road. The second thing that we're doing, to your point about industry bodies and industry groups, there is an industry body, that a group that Ketch has started, and that Ketch is part of. It's called the Ethical Tech Project, that is working on various standards for privacy, reference architectures, how to build data management systems and applications that include privacy as a first-class citizen. So as part of those of the Ethical Tech Project, right, the standards for portability are going to be defined as well. So the audience can check it out. The audience can check it out. I think they'll find it very useful. We have some very interesting luminaries who are part of the board at ETP, and that's where. So we are doing our bit, or we'd like to believe we're doing our bit to bring standardization into this whole new world of privacy tech as well.
Yep, it's certainly one of those areas where, I mean, competition, healthy competition is important, but also there's room for collaboration in this space for the greater good of, all the customers and the privacy tech ecosystem as well. There's so many things we could talk about, and I didn't even get through half of my questions, but we are running out of time. So to summarize, there's some really cool features that you guys have built at Ketch, and I know that you also have an offer for the community. So if you guys are on LinkedIn, please, and I'm also showing that on the screen, please check out Ketch's free offer for the TROPT community. Vivek, before we wrap up, I'd love for you to share any calls to action that you might have, or anything at all that you might want to share with the TROPT privacy tech community who are listening or will be watching, because this could be replayed as well in the future. Or any parting words.
Yeah, no, first, I just want to say thank you to the audience for listening to this conversation. Colleen from Ketch has put out a few links for follow-up. Like, there is a free trial that for all the audience is part of this. So you can check that out. There's a blog post I wrote on the backstory of Ketch. If you want to go deeper onto why we built Ketch, you can check that out. Just easy to search, and maybe Colleen, you can put a link to that as well. And then I'd urge all the techies and engineers on the call to check out developers.ketch.com. All of the capabilities that I just talked about are available and accessible through APIs, and we'd love to get your feedback on our APIs as well. So feel free to check that out as well, in addition to the Ethical Tech Project. So thank you again for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Vivek. And certainly, I couldn't agree more about the need for ethical and responsible tech. Even at TROPT, we do have an unconference coming up on the theme of ethical, responsible, and privacy tech, and the intersection of those three in September. So anyone can join, anyone can present, because it is an unconference. There will be no preset agenda or speaker. So anyone who registers can come and join us. And we hope to see everyone in the audience there as well. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today for another episode of the TROPT Webcast. This has been a really engaging conversation. So Vivek, thank you for that. It seems like people, your message and your comments really resonated with the audience. And with that, have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.